Hello, welcome to Three Count Commentaries. I had another video loaded for today that was supposed to come out, and then I decided to turn it into a live stream because I really didn't have anything to talk about today. So I decided to save the topic for the live stream, and the topic is going to be WWE's desire to destroy and rebuild. And a lot of it comes from the way the fans have reacted to things, the way the fans have pushed things. And this thought was driven by my good buddy Society Review. So I'm going to want to invite him on the channel eventually. I don't maybe one day sooner. But he made a good tweet that I wanted to discuss. And my first response was kind of whacked out because I don't think I really thought it through. I've had some time to think about it since the original video was created. I decided to scrap the video. We're just going to do it here. But a lot of my points are going to be essentially the same thing. So his comment is he had an epiphany about WWE modern fans. WWE's current fan base hates and despises everything the company was built on. They hate Vince McMahon. They hate Hulk Hogan. They hate the Attitude Era. They hate the legends. They hate the divas. Modern WWE fans hate and despise everything that was once deemed popular by a previous generation, and these are the fans the current corporate structure panders to the most. Fans who fundamentally hate everything the company was built on. I think that was a legitimate point. I think that was a pretty legitimate point. I made a similar comment during my Raw review where I talked about how WWE is going to pitch itself in the future once it's continuously forced to edit and nuke parts and pieces of its own history. If you can't mention Vince McMahon, you can't mention Hulk Hogan. That's a large part of wrestling history that's gone. Poof, evaporated. Now, as the WWE, you can't talk about these guys. You cause a serious amount of damage to your ability to market your company in the future. Because part of why people love WWE is because they grew up on it. I mentioned before that Vince McMahon is getting the Walt Disney treatment. And whenever you say the name Walt Disney, people say, well, isn't he an anti-Semite? Similar to Henry Ford. So everything that he's ever done is going to be brushed aside because, well, he's a sex pest or he's a sex trafficker or whatever the case may be, a dirty old man and all that stuff. And when I seen this tweet, I instantaneously, my mind went to, we've been in the middle of a huge cultural revolution over the last probably about 10 years or so, probably more than that. We've gone through an incredible amount of cultural change. I don't know when this thing started, and look, there was always some, but I looked in my original video. I did a look through, and I said, Disney is putting trigger warnings on all of their old movies because of poor cultural depictions. And it's one thing when it's, Dumbo. It's the 1940s. But then you see the list and you see that Aladdin is on the list. Well, Aladdin was in 1992. I remember when Aladdin came out. And they're putting trigger labels, trigger warnings on Aladdin. People are getting triggered by Aladdin. That's just crazy. And then I said, well, how many times have we seen people get offended by things in wrestling. We've seen the crazy amount of censorship since the Peacock deal and everything ported over from the network to Peacock. Almost immediately, people noticed almost anything that involves blackface was taken off of the network. They were editing shows so they won't have to mention Chris Benoit. They're doing it again for Vince. And you're like, hmm. Now, this is taking Society Reviews' point and magnifying it because, yes, it's about WWE fans, absolutely. But I watched for the last maybe week or so, and this was a big deal when it occurred. I don't remember what year it was. But like I said, we're in the same time frame of the last 10 years or so. When the Iron Fist television show came out. And the amount of people who are angry that Iron Fist was white because they never read the comic books and they thought that if somebody does martial arts, they have to be Asian. The world's best martial artist, he got to be Asian. Why does he got to be a white man? And when people they fake like they don't know what wokeness is, that's wokeness. When you're complaining about something and you really don't have any idea about the history of it, you're operating off of stereotypes. You're operating in this goofy Marxist oppressor mentality. And so there have been recent pushes to make anybody other than Danny Rand Iron Fist. WWE has been doing similar things throughout history. The incredible amounts of censorship, not mentioning certain people. And it used to be they didn't mention them because Vince didn't like them. Now it's they don't mention them because it might trigger someone. The crowd might get triggered if you celebrate the Ultimate Warrior. They might get triggered if you celebrate Fabulous Moolah. AJ3 just mentioned Fabulous Moolah. I wasn't even thinking about the Fabulous Moolah when I sat down and did the other video. But yeah, remember they quickly got rid of that. It became generic women's battle royal, and then they just dropped it completely because why even have it, right? So let's go through some of the things that he talked about here. The hatred for Vince McMahon goes back to 1980 something. I'm not even gonna hold you. It's older than the Ring Boy scandal. It's older than Owen Hart falling from the ceiling. It's older than him being accused of rape in 1980 or 1992. It's older than the Janelle Grant stuff. I mean, they hated Vince McMahon way back in 1983. The idea that, I looked a lot of the responses. We just hate racists and rapists. A lot of the hate for Vince McMahon goes back way beyond that sort of stuff. You can see him being mocked in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, saying that he's killing the business, he's killing the company, the WWF is going to die. They hated the guy before he really even got started. You know, everything that has happened since has just been look, see, validation, right? Hulk Hogan. Now, Hulk Hogan is a scumbag. Vince is too, to a degree. But Hulk Hogan is a scumbag. You know, everybody is performatively mad about his race, stuff, and about the unions, and about him burying guys, and his views on the business. And it's all sick, right? Now, Hogan has not done himself any favors throughout history. He has consistently pissed off people and chewed away any good fortune he's had over his 40 years of being a public figure. Um, so look, I understand. You know what I'm saying? And it's weird to me that Hulk Hogan is really just getting his comeuppance now, but it's all fake racist shit. He's a racist. Oh, he's a racist. It's ridiculous. Okay. Now he said that they hate the Attitude Era. That's not entirely true. It's not entirely true that they hate the Attitude Era. But there are a lot of things in the Attitude Era that even WWE has decided they must kneel and apologize for. They're kneeling and apologizing for the casual racism, the blackface segments, the Kai Tai segments. How many documentaries have they put out recently apologizing for some of the stuff that happened during the Attitude Era, the Mark Henry transgender stuff? Oh, it deserves an apology. You got to apologize. The exploitation of women. Oh, even Vince, he's not immune to this stuff. He was doing this stuff too. Well, we wouldn't exactly be doing that kind of thing today. It's like, we get it. This was 1997, 1998. Everybody was hypersexual. That began in the early 90s. Hell, it may even began in the 80s with movies like Porky's and American Pie. This is what American culture was at the time. Why does Hollywood not have to apologize for creating American Pie, Super Bad, and all this kind of stuff? But WWE has to apologize for Sable and the Divas. That's goofy to me. That's stupid. All of that stuff was at the same time. All of it was at the same time. South Park, rap music. Did you imagine? There's some rappers today who probably wouldn't make. I think Project Pat recently came out and was like, I think he's a pastor or something now. Probably wouldn't make the same kind of music today that he made back in, the early 2000s. He probably wouldn't make that kind of stuff anymore. He's a different person now, you know? But he's not going to go back and destroy. He can't, for starters. He's not going to go back and destroy all the stuff that he did create. And I don't see him apologizing for it. He just, you put things in context. It was 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Nobody died, and at the time, nobody really cared. And all of a sudden, you see on social media almost continuously people being upset about some random thing that happened either in the Attitude Era or the Ruthless Aggression Era, especially Ruthless Aggression, because that's when Vince was on TV most. He's making out with some young diva. He's making a racially insensitive comment, not to John Cena, but to Sabu. He's got a do-rag on. He's culturally appropriating. John Cena's culturally appropriating. And you're like, why is everybody so sensitive? And when did that? Of course, we got to ask the question, when did it start? But the Attitude Era gets a lot of heat. The Ruthless Aggression Era gets a lot of heat too. Not because people hate it, but because they have been indoctrinated and they've been led to believe that everything is offensive. And you have to be offended. Again, I watched the Attitude Era. I watched wrestling from pretty much every era. I don't think I have genuinely been offended by something in a while. Genuinely kind of pissy about it. Not in a while. As a matter of fact, I don't think it's ever happened in terms of pro wrestling. When I was young, I saw Raven get crucified. I used to go to church. That never upset me. I never really thought about it too much. It just seemed like a fucked up thing to do to somebody. You know, the Iraq War, Sergeant Slaughter, Hulk Hogan thing. I didn't think it was that controversial until I was in my 20s, because again, I was 7 or 8 years old when that thing happened. I just hated Sergeant Slaughter, which is what you're supposed to get out of this whole thing. But there became a now, at least at that time, you could say it was bad judgment on Vince's part because it was lambasted at the time. And a lot of this stuff, the Attitude Era stuff, the uh, overt sexuality and all that occurred at the time, you know? So sometimes you have these things that were on edge at the time. But again, pop culture was rock music, it was South Park, Britney Spears was a teenage girl in a skirt, and then she became a slightly older teenage girl and she was covered in water and dancing with a snake. This was that time. It was different from today. And the weird thing is, there's still hypersexual women today. You still got your Megan Thee Stallions and your Cardi B's. I mean, Lil' Kim was an aberration in 1996 or whatever. She was pretty much the only one doing that stuff. Now there's like 100 of them. It's so many of them now you don't even really notice. But you're still supposed to be apologetic for hiring models for your Divas era. Oh, you was hiring calendar girls. You weren't trying to go out and find women wrestlers. Nobody cared about women's wrestling at that time. They did not care. Well, they had bra and panties matches. They were exploiting the women. What else? What other skill did they have? 90% of them had huge boobs and face jobs. They weren't goddamn Luthez. They were hired to be managers, ring announcers, and that sort of thing. And because they were really bad, they were usually kept short. They had a bunch of soap opera stuff that they could get into, but the big issue with the Divas era was the over the top nature of the sexuality with Vince, and like the mud matches and the pillow fight, lingerie pillow fights, hot lesbian action. And they would just, you see constantly people having to complain, or people complaining. You do see that. And WWE apologized. Oh, I don't know. You even got Vince Russo, who had women dancing in shark cages in TNA, coming out saying, "Bro, I never ever booked a bra and panties match, bro." The same guy who put Major Guns on TV in WCW. And the same that same guy, he's running around now saying, "Oh, bro, I never booked one bra and panties match, bro. That stuff happened after I left." Everybody's trying to run away from it. So why wouldn't the fans become more and more entrenched in their cultural revolution if they're just going to get what they want? If the company's going to strip away everything that was fun and interesting and apologize for everything they did in the past, why wouldn't people continue to complain about it? And I said, I'm pretty much willing to guess within the next 10 to 15 years or so, there's going to be trigger warnings on these shows. There's going to be trigger warnings telling people how culturally insensitive Papa Shango is. You know, it's going to be sad. And like, I remember, and not even just WWE. Like, I remember when Tracy Smothers passed away. There were so many videos of Tracy Smothers going around the internet. Most of it was Tracy Smothers in the Confederate flag. He was to wear the Confederate flag jacket, you know? And everybody would have to say, "Oh, he's not a racist. that was Southern culture. That was just part of his gimmick, blah, 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 blah. Same thing with the Fabulous Freebirds. Whenever Michael Hayes gets into some kind of race trouble, there's always a picture of Michael Hayes with the Confederate flag painted on his face with the rest of the Freebirds because they have changed what that meant. I'm like, how much longer are you going to be able to have the Freebirds on the network? Eventually, it's going to have to take them off, right? Eventually, just going to have to get rid of them. People are talking about the cultural insensitivity of characters like Kamala and Umaga. How long before there's trigger warnings for all the Samoans who might be upset at Umaga or the head shrinkers who are eating giant turkey legs on television? We're not becoming a freer society. We're becoming a more tyrannical one. There was a guy who made a tweet the other day after Hulk Hogan got booed at Raw on Netflix that the only non-problematic wrestler from the 80s is Randy Savage. And they were basically celebrating the fact that Randy Savage died before anything negative about him came out. Now, there's stories about Randy Savage using the N-word in the locker room, just like there's stories that Andre the Giant had done similar. So he didn't quite pass the goalpost, but those were just stories. Nobody ever came out and said Randy Savage called him a nigger. It was mostly just people thinking he was black. It's an insane. And then when you think about it from like the 80s, right? How many real top stars from the 80s aren't problematic? Because who else gets run out of town? Ric Flair gets run out of town. He's a sex pest. Some people even say he's a rapist because they watched a documentary. And the documentary is 100% true. Unvarnished truth. So Ric Flair can't make any. He can barely make any public appearances anymore without being trolled and attacked. And you get trolled and attacked like Tommy Dreamer. He got suspended for defending Ric Flair. TNA suspended him for defending Ric Flair in a documentary that was probably recorded long before he even got that job. Like, how ludicrous is that? Of course, there was at least 2 different documentaries on the Ultimate Warrior talking about how he was a homophobe, right? Of course, Superfly Snicker was accused of murder. I mean, there's just so many guys. I mean, Roddy Piper, you can't really say too much negative about Roddy Piper. He did more damage to himself than to anybody else. Oh, yeah, don't forget the guttural, visceral hatred of Pat Patterson as well. There's a lot of that too. A lot of that tied up in the Ring and Boy scandal because everybody got fooled by the con man. So when you see that, Society Review says that the modern fans hate what the company was built on. It's true. But a lot of it is due to propaganda. And it's also been in the middle of our general cultural revolution. Our desire to put trigger warnings on things, edit movies, edit books. They're going through editing old books, man. Books like Huckleberry Finn. There was a guy who recently said we need to put out new translations of books that are in our own language because they're in a version of our language that we no longer speak. Can you imagine that? Somebody deciding they're just going to translate important documents and important pieces of work for modern Twitter speak because we don't talk that way anymore. So when do we start updating our languages? Every 20 years? Remember when guys used to say bet? Or used to say, man, that's cold. Like it's not literally cold. Slang. Slang should not be translated because there's people out there who don't understand it. It's ridiculous. All of this stuff is about the Cultural Revolution. It takes me to like the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And I don't want to go too much into it. I'm not going to. But when you saw that Mao was trying to destroy the four olds, old habits, old ideas, old customs, old culture. And as X9 says here, they've been editing James Bond books. So far, we have seen a lot of the stuff that they have done on the surface level. Complain about diversity, equity, and inclusion. All of a sudden, you got a black Spider-Man, a black Iron Woman, Black Panther is a woman, Thor is a woman. Like everybody's been paying attention to that kind of stuff. Nobody has noticed a lot of the brain rot that goes even deeper, where people are deleting scenes from movies. They're cutting out music. What was that song, "Baby It's Cold Outside," that they're saying is like a rape song or something like that? Like, how is this a positive for our culture? How have they how is this a net positive for the culture? That people can't engage with the culture as it existed at the time. The whole point of writing something down is that you have something to say in that moment that the future needs to know. Or you're telling a story that might entertain in the future. Okay? The idea that we can take something from the past and edit it so that the original version doesn't exist anymore, which almost always is the case. Because once you edit that version, you can almost never find the original anymore. It's the same thing for songs, right? Unless you edit some of these songs, you just never can find the original version. And so it detaches people from the past. What it does is it attempts to force the present onto the past. And it's a continuous thing. This is what 1984 was all about. How Winston would just sit in his office editing the newspaper. Like that was his job, was to edit the newspaper. If I remember correctly. I haven't read it in a while. And it won't be long before you can't get that book either. And God goes to is right, because this is how you're supposed to have. That's the reaction you're supposed to have. Like when you see blackface and they show you the blackface movies and stuff like that, or you see a cartoon of oil skinned black people with big red lips. You're like, man, they really did hate Negroes back then, huh? You're not supposed to get offended by it. Because you're supposed to try to understand why it was done in the first place. Try to understand the culture that created it, the sentiment that created it. Now, in the 80s and 90s, and in the early 2000s, it really began in like the mid 90s, was a culture of unfettered fun. It didn't matter if it was offensive, if it was fun. And hell, sometimes it being offensive is what made it fun. And so people did things that they thought was fun. They did things that they thought were funny. And sometimes those things were insensitive. Sometimes those things were mean. Sometimes those things hurt people's feelings. But then you're supposed to context those things and say, we wouldn't do that today. We wouldn't do the Kaientai bad dubbing, which it is racist because it's supposed to be a rip off of kung fu movies, which is Chinese, not Japanese. And that was supposed to be a rip on that. As funny as it was at the time, you could see why today people wouldn't do it. You could see why the Mexicool showing up on lawnmowers wouldn't be something that you would do today. You just look at it and be like, man, that was quite a time, wasn't it? You wouldn't do it today and call it and just wrap it up. If people choose to get offended, they can choose to not engage with that material. There's no point in editing that stuff, trying to explain it, apologizing for it. And people don't even realize that sometimes when you get on these streaming platforms, there's whole episodes of TV shows that have gone missing because the subject matter upset people. So that episode isn't aired anymore. And not to get too crazy about it, but there's an episode of the Boondocks, the Tyler Perry episode, right? Vanished from the face of the earth. I think you had to buy the DVD in order to see it. I have the DVD, and I'm pretty sure that episode is on there. But it only aired one time. There's a couple of South Park episodes where they drew Muhammad. Those episodes are gone. They don't appear on any streaming service. I think you got to buy the DVD in order to get them. That's where our world is going. It begins with things that are obviously offensive, and then it ends up with things that are kind of vaguely offensive. All the while, it's all about cultural revolution. These people continuously wanting to stand up for the plight of the oppressed to the point where they can't even see bad depictions of things. Despite all this stuff, I still did manage to find a man getting lynched on WWF television. I did see that. Black man, too. Still managed to catch it. It happened. I ain't going to tell anybody where because I don't want the company going to look for it. But, and trying to get it taken down. Just watch stuff and understand that it took place in a certain time. And throughout this channel, we've talked about a lot of this stuff. One of the things is the xenophobia, right? How the Americans are always the good guys. The foreigners, the Russians, the Germans, even up to recently where you had Rusev. All those guys were the bad guys. And now we got today, people will throw a fit if you chant USA at Gunter. Actual American citizens will go on the internet and complain that you chanted USA at Gunter. I've seen it. It's quite frankly the most disturbing thing in the world. Because why would you be upset about that? Why do you care about that? It upsets you that somebody is chanting for the country that you live in, that they would be anti his country. Who cares about his country? When they go to other countries and they boo the United States, does that offend you? Because it don't offend me. It don't matter. And it's a lot of young people. And that's WWE's problem. Yes, some of the The kingmakers are a little bit older. But a lot of the woke wrestling journalists, a lot of these people are in their, well, some of the performative ones are in my age group. They're in their late 30s, early 40s, offended by everything. But a lot of the genuinely offended are young people. People who sit down and want to write articles about how, you know, the lack of feminism and representation of blacks and women in pro wrestling is problematic by some young, naive Brit. Because 99% of that stuff comes from young, naive Brits. It's like you don't even understand what you're doing here. You're not even capable of understanding the art form that you're critiquing here. Because wrestling is a caricature of everything. It's a caricature of a sport. There's going to be tropes. There's going to be a little of everything, just like in movies and television shows. And then you realize, wait a minute, they're trying to get rid of that stuff everywhere. You got Captain America apologizing for representing America, apologizing for being white. So are you serious that somebody who represents the United States has to be the bad guy now? You can't, there's no hacksaw Jim Duggan, ho, waving the American flag now. Hell, I think half the reason Hulk Hogan was getting booed is because there was an American flag out there getting waved. And what they can't erase through censorship, they're trying to replace. And X9 is talking about Snow White. That's the biggest issue. Is one of the reasons why this new generation of fans loves the modern WWE so much is because it fights so hard to replace the old era. You hear Triple H and The Rock come out there talking about this is the most profitable the WWF has ever been. It's more profitable than the Attitude Era. You know, we got the best everything of all time because the idea is to make today better than the past. So you don't have to worry about the past anymore. Don't look into the past anymore. Focus on right now. Year zero is right now. Oh, we're going to get rid of Hulk Hogan. We're going to replace Hulk Hogan with John Cena. John Cena is going to be our modern day Hulk Hogan. The actual Hulk Hogan, throw him in a bonfire. We're just going to replace him with John Cena. The Attitude Era, replace that with the Endeavor Era. No, 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 no. Don't focus on the divas. Focus on the women's revolution. And yet they continue to create video games and trading cards and posters and action figures of old characters. They're not going to stop using the past to make money, but they want to apologize and denigrate the past as much as possible. That's really what they want to do. They want a new mythology, a new creation story that doesn't involve Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan, a new greatest era that doesn't involve the casual racism of the Attitude Era or the casual homophobia or xenophobia or sexism of the previous eras. And yet, I constantly see people who are getting into the business and becoming fans because of these things. It's an interesting subject. And pro wrestling is just one of the many cultural institutions that is going to be sought out and destroyed. Soon the LWO is going to be for Latink's World Order. And not one person in that group is going to refer to themselves as Latinx, but the company might do it just for the marketing. They may do it just for the marketing. They don't understand that things are done for the time frame. And sometimes people push the envelope even for the time frame. A book like The Scarlet Letter used to be absolutely ridiculous. I remember reading a lot about the response of The Scarlet Letter. It's a book about a young woman who has an affair with a political figure, and she ends up raising a baby by herself. And she literally gets a scarlet letter to show everybody she's a whore, essentially. And it's one of my favorite books. I ain't read it in years though. But you see, it's a book that is subversive for the time because it depicts the woman as a heroic figure for suffering through all the mistreatment and being the one person who has to suffer for her affair. The guy she has an affair with doesn't suffer. If I remember correctly, she was married, and he doesn't suffer either. And they both just essentially leave her, and she's left to raise this baby by herself, and her child suffers. And it's a great story, and it's subversive for its time. Something like that is an important piece of art, but you can't have that book done 400 times and it matter. It's just you have to read that book and consider the time frame when it was written. What were these people thinking when they picked that book up and read it for the first time and said, "Oh my God, could this actually be happening?" It's like, yeah, pastors and priests are banging people in the congregation. Of course they are. Some of them have husbands or boyfriends or whatever. Yeah, of course they did. And maybe it's because I was very lucky to have lived through the entire Vince McMahon era. He got the company officially in 1983. I was born a couple of months after that. So from WrestleMania, even before WrestleMania 1 to WrestleMania 38, I was able to live through every single cultural moment that was reflected in WWE. WWE wasn't the only, you know, um, fictional medium depicting things like the Gulf War or, Reagan era politics. They weren't the only medium that was engaging in hypersexuality and the sexual exploitation of women in a feminist context from what they would define as sexual exploitation of women. They weren't the only ones. That was 99% of TV. It was MTV all day. Whether they were preteen girls, post-teen girls, boy bands dancing in the rain, there was a lot of sexuality. WWE is not divorced at all from the cultural moment. The excess of the 2000s, yep, WWE was there right with them. And now they're in the same when it comes to the they're not as bad as when it comes to the wokeness. I will give WWE credit. It's not nearly as bad as it could be when it comes to wokeness. But I hate to see how bad it's going to get. I mean, you had people literally ashamed of the butterfly belt How pathetic are these folks? You got your Sasha Bankses complaining about the butterfly belt. Didn't do her any good. She still complains. She says finds more things to complain about because she's a spoiled brat. That's like so many of these other young people out here. You fix one thing that they were complained about. I remember that WWE redid the entire Women's Money in the Bank because of the way that they booked the very first one, where James Ellsworth helped Carmella win. They redid the entire match all over again to get away from the backlash. Remember when Ric Flair stole a kiss from Becky Lynch at the Royal Rumble, and then you can't find it nowhere on any version of the event because they edited it out because it was a forced kiss, which is a really old spot that you used to see even from like Bugs Bunny. But it got edited out. How ridiculous is this shit? And there'll be people who are telling you it's all for the better good. It's all for the greater good. It's for the betterment of your children. You don't want your children to be exposed to xenophobia and homophobia and racism, and you should be able to teach your kids like the world used to be different. You know? Some things that your kids are going to see didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. Some things that they might learn, like they might really love, are really old. There's a kid, my cousin has a child. He's like 6. He's big on the Smurfs. The Smurfs. The Smurfs were a thing when I was a child. But he loves Smurfs, and he's only like 6 or he's about 5 or 6. Some things have that sort of cultural resonance. Some things are going to die on the vine because of how in their time they are. And you can let the Attitude Era be that thing. Edit out important moments in history instead of just letting these things die on the vine. Hey, it was 1997, man. It was 1999. What who really cares? Nobody thought about this stuff. You know how many black people watched WWE, saw X-Pac in blackface and said nothing? Didn't give a shit? They saw the Road Dogg with cornrows and never once came out of anybody's mouth that he's culturally appropriating or trying to be black. And he was even rapping at some points. And not one person said, "Oh, the Road Dogg think he's black." I never heard that. And I don't do nothing but hang around black people. Not one time did I ever hear the Road Dogg was trying to be black. Not one time. Not one time did somebody think to be offended on behalf of Mark Henry, who was a horn dog, ended up trapped with a transgender. Nobody was offended. Nobody was upset by that. Except the people who were on the very, very, very extreme. And there was too few of them for them to matter. Now it's a bunch of people getting offended on their behalf. Look, there's some obvious things that shouldn't have happened. Vince saying the N-word. And I'm talking about just on screen. I'm not just talking about like the Ring Boy scandal, because obviously those things shouldn't have happened. Talk about creative decisions. There's a whole bunch of things that were kind of objectively offensive. But I still put those things in their the context of their time. Or it's an anachronism, and that's what makes it interesting. In 2006, there was a barefoot Samoan wrestler with a grill and face paint. It was a real throwback to the old head shrinkers, throwback to the wild Samoans, completely and totally out of place for that time. You know, completely and totally out of place for that time. But that's what made it work, because it was an old school wrestling gimmick. And you could say, "Oh my God, that was offensive." Oh no! But then they still complain because the Usos or 3 minute warning, or they just trying to be black. Why are the Samoans black coded? It's cultural appropriation. People who are offended by anything will find things to be offended about. There's just no two ways about it. And it's a sad thing. But like I said, our cultural and moral betters have not decided when year zero is. They're trying to make year zero right now. This is the greatest era. These are the greatest stars. This is the best wrestling. It's a new boom period, greater than any history before. Cody Rhodes and John Cena are two of the biggest stars of all time. And you're just supposed to just be like, "Yep, I agree," and roll with it. And just roll with it. No, no, we're not going to do that. Not going to let you rewrite history. It's not year zero. Not going to let you do that. And despite all of this, by the way, there's still cries of racism and homophobia and transphobia and Islamophobia and sexism and all these things that they're still talking about that stuff even in the modern kind product. I don't get it. It's a it's a bizarre scenario. But the one thing pop culture got going for it is typically they lean very heavy on the old stuff, which has become a huge issue for Marvel, DC, Disney, WWE. It's always constantly trying to remix old stuff because the old stuff is the only thing that people are interested in. Nobody's interested in your new Iron Man. Nobody cares about your new Captain America. Nobody gives a shit about your new Lion King or your new Aladdin. Most of your new franchises aren't as popular as your old ones anyway, Disney. And the same thing could be said for WWE. Cody Rhodes might be a big deal right now, but he's nothing. He's not even a drop in the bucket in comparison to Hulk Hogan or Andre the Giant or Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock in their prime. He's a shell of even his old man in his prime. And I don't even mind Cody. I just tell it like it is. Those guys have entered the realm of myth where they're household names. People would know who they are. As much as I like Roman Reigns, it's still like young women find Roman Reigns every other week and start TikToking about him, like how fine he is. That's pretty much it. I loves me some Roman, you know. I'll put the ones up. Just tell the truth. Now is not the best era of all time. It's not year zero. There is no cultural revolution. We're not going to let you get away with it. And I'm not being a conspiracy theorist. You know, it's a joke. WG Phil says, I wonder how long they'll go after 3 minutes or Uso for cultural appropriating. I'm wondering when they're going to start looking at stuff like about Papa Shango, and he's going to get deleted, and anything featuring him is going to get deleted. I'm wondering when they're going to start putting pixelations over Vince McMahon's face or something, or re-editing the shots so that he's not in them, like they did with Mel Phillips, the boy lover Mel Phillips. They reshot the shows so that Mel Phillips would never be on camera. How long before they started doing that stuff to Vince? WG Phil says WWE has an identity crisis. They have to cater to the woke mob, yet cool with Trump. And that's going to be the issue because WWE is Americana. It's a cultural institution. The biggest wrestling company in the world was born right here in the United States, playing right off of American culture, importing it around the world. How do you resist the woke? Especially when you let the woke in the locker room. When you let the woke in your backyard, how do you resist it? Do I think WWE will outwoke AEW? No, I don't think so. Remember, Tony Khan banned Hulk Hogan the first year he was in the business. Right? He banned Hulk Hogan reflexively and his wife. First year he was in business. You're not welcome here. Crazy Hogan got booed and his beer sales went up. Amazing. Big Armada says, when Chappelle, Chameleonaire, and the Wayans brothers did whiteface, I thought we would have been even on the blackface thing. Nope, people are still mad about it, even though it was a different time. It's not even really a different. It was so different. Most people's grandparents weren't even alive when this stuff was happening. You know, it's that ridiculous. But you see this stuff all day, every day, like it happened yesterday. And they will always tag as anybody. History wasn't that long ago. It was my grandmother did this. Think, oh, well, that's great. My grandma was born during the Great Depression. That was in the the late part of the Depression. No, early part of the Depression, because the Depression was like 1929, I think. She was born in 1933, so 3 or 4 years into the Depression. She lived a rough life, but she died in splendor in comparison. That's how life changes, you know. And whenever I get that, I get people trying to equate bad history of yesterday to stuff that's going on today. I always remember that my grandparents, who I had the pleasure of meeting, all of them died. Well, yeah, pretty much all of them died in their 60s. They had much better lives at the end than they had at the beginning. And I think about that in terms of how our culture has moved forward. That maybe their parents would dream of having their own house. And my grandparents achieved it. All four of them. All four of my grandparents had their own house. How can you? I just don't. And these were not rich people. They weren't teachers or senators, and they didn't do any middle class work at all. My grandma worked in the kitchen of a hospital. She was what was it, a dietary assistant or something like that. All she did was deliver trays, and she was able to raise 5 kids on that income. Her husband, who was my step grandfather, who I only knew as my grandfather because they got married before I was even born, he worked in the factories. GM, Ford, Chrysler, it's hard to tell. So long ago. He's been dead for so long. God damn it, I can't tell you. My dad's father, same thing, worked in the factories, died in his 70s. His mom was a housewife. She raised 4 kids. I think about that sort of stuff when I think about history. I don't think about how oppressed people are. I think about how oppressed they were and how they got out of it. Because even though I don't think my grandmother had any real skills, talking about my father's mother, she had 4 children, all of whom did pretty well for themselves, even though things fell apart later, as they tend to do. But coming from where they came from to where they were, it didn't have to be perfect. It was just so much better than living on the plantation or being, stuck in Mississippi or Alabama. And yet we see people today who have never known life without a phone complaining constantly about how everything sucks. I'm in that wonderful sweet spot where everybody I knew had a telephone. Everybody I knew had a television, but not everybody had cable. Not everybody had a VCR. Not you know. So it is like that technological sweet spot, you know. And then of course there's children who were born during the age of the internet. They don't know what the hell the dial on the TV was for. And I love sometimes looking at old videos of people, kids looking at obsolete technology like typewriters and those portable televisions, trying to figure out how those things work. Because those are the things that I wish I had a portable television. I never got one though. I had one TV in the house for most of my life. Eventually, I got a little bit older, and it became 2 TVs, 3 TVs. TVs got cheaper, so we got more of them. But that's the kind of stuff I think about. I don't constantly look at things to be offended for, or things to be offended by, or people to be offended for. I look at it and say, "Man, that was a rough time. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. That was then. This is now. Tomorrow is different. What tomorrow may bring, I don't know. I might not even be here tomorrow. So I'm going to enjoy today. I'm not going to let yesterday ruin today. If I and I say I have such a, I don't know where this came from either, because it wasn't like a concerted effort on my part to overcome being offended by stuff. Because even when I was on some woke dumb shit, I was never that offended by things. I was more performatively offended. Like I was supposed to be mad, but I didn't really care. You know, it took me a while to mature and just be like, do I really give a fuck about any of this stuff? Like, no, not really. Like when I was a kid, I was legitimately scared of white people because I saw the Emmett Till photo and it had been passed around in the classroom. The unedited photo of Emmett Till's busted up, brutalized face. And I was like, holy shit. Like that was deeply concerning. But other than that, I never really got offended about reading a story that was supposed to depict black people negatively or looking at posters or anything that depicted black people negatively. It never really upset me. Didn't bother me at all. And so now I'm sitting here and I'm watching people have seizures because somebody got called a thug. A basketball player got called a thug, or a football player got called a thug by some white guy. The nappy headed hose or something like that. And they're like, oh, 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 they're hyperventilating all over it. I'm like, why do you care? Your life must not have any friction at all to bother you. And that's when I started going back and thinking about would my grandfather would be mad about that. My grandfather hated white people. He never really had nothing. No, I'm talking about father's father. He didn't really say nothing positive about white people at all. All right. I don't think I've ever heard the man say anything positive about white folks. And yet he never sat down and complained about white people. He grumbled about them a lot. he never said, he didn't spend all his time thinking about white folks. He had a lot of negative experiences with white people, and that's what he lived with. But he moved on. Didn't take the roof from over his head. Didn't take no money out of his pocket. He still got his family with him when he died. So he didn't really care about white people that much. He didn't favor them, but he never would have gone on Twitter or Facebook and went on and on and on about white people. He never would have let white people have that much space in his head. If you asked him, he'll tell you. If there was a situation that occurred, he may comment on it. But he didn't like white people at all. You know, so it's an interesting bit, you know, and that just kind of informs my worldview. My knowledge of how cultural Marxism works, where they always try to destroy old customs and old traditions, as the Chinese Cultural Revolution. You see it again and again. I was just reading about it earlier. They went around renaming streets to raise up morale. And that's exactly what we're doing now. Changing the name of streets, changing the name of stadiums to make people feel better. So I'm going to say, like, one day, what are they going to change the name from WWE? What are they going to change the name? They're not ever going to do that. It's a brand. They're not going to do that. But it's something to think about, isn't it? Trigger warnings, all that kind of shit is something to think about. WG Phil says, listening to Hogan's tape about his daughter dating a black guy, what did he say that most people have the same sentiments about? If you ask Pac or people of color who want their daughters to bring home, it's either their own or a white person. But if it's a son, it's usually their own or mixed with their own kind. I sat here. I'm going to tell you this story. This is why I'm not offended by what Hulk Hogan said. I heard my own dad say it. My brother was dating a white girl in college. And he said, you do not bring that white girl home. And my mama actually got on him about that. She pushed back. Oh, how can you tell him not to do that? Yada, yada, yada. Didn't you date white girls when you were in the service? Blah, 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 blah. He's like, you don't bring white girls home. I remember my dad told me not to even date white girls. He told my brother the light version of the story. You know, he said, don't bring her home. He told me, stay away from white people. Don't date white girls at all. Leave them alone. You got all these other women over here. You don't need no white women. Leave them alone. And I listened. I still don't date white women. But when Hulk Hogan said that he wouldn't want his daughter dating some nigger, I can imagine pretty much Hispanic parents saying the same thing. Arab parents saying the same thing. He didn't say anything that upset anybody that people didn't already think was true. Most people don't really like interracial dating. The people who engage in it like it, and it's fine for them. But their parents are probably going to frown. And, you know, people got to get over it. But he voiced his opinion on the matter. He didn't like interracial dating. It is what it is. Why would I be mad that Hulk Hogan wouldn't want me as a son-in-law? I'm never going to be in that position. 2 reasons. 1, I'm never going to meet his daughter. 2, I don't date white girls. So why would I be mad? The dude she was dating should have been mad. but not me. AJ3 says, even in the Jim Crow era, black people found a way to thrive and prosper. We had aura during the Great Depression. I got that from this YouTuber called Aquarius Wave. You should go read Hotep Histories. He's doing a really good job. He's put me onto so many books. Like, I already knew, how black people was getting down back in the day. Again, you just read old Jet, old Ebony magazines before that stuff gets deleted off the Internet Archive, and you'll see black debutante balls, black-owned businesses, black men walking around in suits everywhere. They having the same conversations about interracial dating in 1957 or whatever that people were talking about 25 years later. You see decadence in black. You see middle-class black people. It wasn't all good times. It wasn't all what's happening. There was black people who lived well. They didn't get a TV show all the time. There wasn't some sociologist following them around. Well, there kind of was, treating them like animals in a zoo, which is essentially what academics do to black people. And they've been doing it since the 60s. I don't know how many times I've seen these documentaries of some white sociologist hanging out with a black gang. How do you live in urban city USA? Treating them like gorillas in the zoo or something like that. Come on, man. It's like National Geographic or some shit. But yeah, not all black people were poor and destitute and illiterate and stupid. And not even all black people were hurt by Jim Crow. Some benefited from Jim Crow. This is what Dr. Claude Anderson wants to teach everybody. Now, I'm not big on Dr. Claude Anderson. I ain't the biggest fan of him. But he was right when he said that. Segregation, again, it's the Thomas Sowell principle. Trade-offs. Some people benefited from Jim Crow segregation because then you had your own black hotels, your own black liquor stores and drug pharmacies, and all that kind of stuff. They just benefited. They took advantage of white people not wanting your money. That's one of those things that don't. When you start seeing the Cultural Revolution, those things get deleted. The fact that Black Wall Street was rebuilt pretty quickly gets deleted. The fact that a black man actually helped kill Emmett Till gets deleted. Like, there's so many things from history that we are propagandized to believe is true. It's not really all that. It's not true. Or it's more complicated than we're led up to believe. And if the Civil War can be more complicated than we were ever thought to believe, can a segment in 1998 be more complicated than we were led to believe? And I feel so bad to get back on the wrestling subject, I feel bad for guys like JTG, right? The guy can do podcasts and interviews for 20 years talking about how Crime Time was his idea and it was based off a character he was doing in developmental. And people will still turn around and say, how could Vince McMahon force you to do that? And he'll just be like, it was my idea. He could say it was his idea till the cows come home. And he will never get any credit for it. It will always be, Vince made you do this. Sugar Bear Harris, the guy who went on to become Kamala. He was being Kamala before he came to WWF. He owned the gimmick. Kamala was created in Memphis. You ask people, Vince McMahon forced him to be Kamala. Like, no, he did not. He forced Tony Atlas to be Saba Simba, which is just as bad. But no, he had no hand in creating Kamala. No hand. He didn't create Kamala. That's just the world that we live in, man. People find reasons to be upset, and they will not let the truth, contextualization, or anything else modify what they believe. It's sick. Dorian Carter says, I don't like Vince Russo's philosophy of wrestling, as nothing in the wrestling business matters. It's all about the ratings. You can't act like one doesn't affect the rest. I don't like Vince Russo's because he's not consistent. I mean, he's consistent in some ways, but mostly he doesn't even understand how a proper story works. And to me, that's when I stopped listening. It's like Vince Russo has never completed a story from beginning to end. Find me a Vince Russo story that had a beginning, middle, and end that he wrote on his own. He claimed he had complete creative control, and there were stories that. What was the end of Choppy Choppy Yo Pee? What was the end of that? Where did that go? Because that was a Vince Russo idea. Where did that go? Where did the bullshit and he was doing in WCW with his fake DX, major guns, or what they call Misfits in Action? What was that angle for? What did that lead to? Like, this guy's supposed to be, I was a storyteller. I was a writer. You never wrote an ending. These fucking things never ended. You just kept going and going and going and going and making it more complicated and making it more dumb. Whatever. But that's the reason why I don't listen to Vince Russo. But he's interesting. He got some interesting takes sometimes. I want to talk about this before I wrap it up. We're going to talk about the Raw Netflix ratings because WWE put it out. And we're only going to talk about it because WWE and Netflix put it out. And I want to say I don't necessarily like it. I don't like the ratings. I don't think the ratings are strong. I actually think the ratings are quite weak. But there's a lot of debates about what these things mean. So the press release says WWE Raw wrestles up 4.9 million global views for Netflix debut. It says it's off to a strong start with the Monday night program capturing 4.9 million live +1 views globally. And then they put 2 stars there. So the 2 stars, it says does not include viewing in 92 countries or territories where Netflix doesn't yet distribute WWE, which includes France, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, the Philippines, and South Korea. So it doesn't say whether England and Canada and places like that are counted. So we don't know what countries are involved or what countries aren't. But it says 4.9 million views globally. So many people are like, oh, no, that's just the United States. It's like, well, they say later on it was the #1 trending topic in the US, Brazil, Australia, and the UK. Okay. So it's playing in Brazil, it's playing in the UK, playing in Australia, and only 4.9 million viewers globally? For 4.9 million views globally. Understand, man. Smackdown on Fox, I'm sorry, got 3.9 million viewers when they had their debut. They got 3.9 million. So the Netflix deal only gave them 1 million more viewers on the debut. That's not good. That's not good. Something is fishy about these numbers. I'm not saying that I thought that this was going to break Hogan and Andre's record. I'm not saying that. But I can't think that less than 5 million viewers out of 282 million, I can't look at that as a good thing. That just means that pretty much all of the people who watched Raw had Netflix and they watched it. That's pretty much what it sounds like to me. You booked a big show and everybody who had access to Netflix and was watching Raw anyway watched it. What about the casuals? And it said it had a average U.S. audience of 1.2 million households. It says Netflix averaged 2.6 million households in the U.S. according to Video Amp, which is higher than Raw's average. Okay, so they did a 2.6 million in the United States. So that means globally 1.3 million, and it includes the UK, Australia, and Brazil, which are not small countries. UK is an island, but and Australia is a continent. There's a lot of people in these countries. They're also in Spain, in Mexico, and Canada already. I'm not looking at these numbers, and I don't really necessarily think that they're great. I'm not sure this is a great number, but I don't know enough about how these things are calculated. Some people are going to tell me, "Oh, these are just households. It doesn't say how many people are watching," which is true. These are 1.2 million households, or how many people in the household. I don't care about that. I just look at it and saying to myself, it doesn't look like a big enough number. I'd have thought 10 million would have been huge, would have been great for them. But 5 million, but the show is weekly. They have a chance to grow, I guess. And they're saying it's off to a strong start, but The Rock's not going to be on the show every week. Neither is John Cena. So we'll see if this falls in half or whatever over the next week. So we'll see. I don't know. Let's look at some of the comments before I get out of here. Timu says WWE and AEW simply don't produce very enjoyable TV experiences. Very little reason to watch their TV over some other TV out there. Yes, they do make the television shows pointless. What's even worse is Triple H makes the pay-per-views pointless too, because he adds nothing to the pay-per-views either. So you could skip Raws and Smackdowns, not miss anything, and then you could skip pay-per-views and not miss anything. So if you can skip shows without missing nothing, then why wouldn't you skip shows? WG Phil says, why did the black guy help kill Till for? I believe he just believed that, he had raped or groped the young lady in question, um that he was guilty of the crime that the white boy said that he was guilty of. And that stuff happens. Sometimes people are convinced that you did something that you either, and there's a lot of debate about what he did, and some people just say he whistled, people say he groped her. There's a lot of race riots started because white women complained, so, or lied in some instances or whatever. But yeah, that was basically why. He said he wasn't even a writer. He wrote articles on magazines. Yeah, he wasn't a storyteller. You know, he wrote. He talked about being inspired by Jerry Springer, which of course is horseshit television. So Vince Russo was the one who came up with the Millionaires Club versus New Blood angle in WCW. Okay, how did it end? What was the end of that angle? The end of that angle, I think, was WCW going out of business. Um, Dorian Carter says when it comes to the civil rights movement, they always bring up Rosa Parks more and more than Malcolm X or the Nation of Islam. And Rosa Parks was a completely phony, set up situation too. And it's weird how much propaganda is out there. Look, it's not to attack her personally, but she was just a part of a larger ploy, a larger design to rabble rouse in the South. Jermaine Chapman says, why do public schools have such a hyper focus on the Civil War, civil rights, and World War II? A lot of that stuff has to do with the politics of the era. The Civil War is I don't want to go too, I already did this long enough. I'll say this. The Civil War was the great justification of leftist progressive aggression. They told the story of the Civil War is that it's okay to kill racists and the federal government has the ultimate authority over the states. And if the government feels like you're doing a racism, they have the unchecked right to invade pretty much your state and force you to change your laws. And so everything flows from there. The entire civil rights movement flows from the belief that the federal government has the right to invade states, either with a military or with law, and force you to change your laws. Now we are seeing it on a smaller level, where the Department of Justice is essentially invading police forces around the country, forcing DEI onto them for not having enough black officers, or they're pulling over too many black people in these neighborhoods, and they're called consent decrees. It all comes from the Civil War, because the Civil War is justified. It's the one justified war. If you talk to any leftist, the Civil War is the most justified war of any war. You got to go in there and kill slave owners, even though most of the slave owners didn't even fight. They sent other people to fight for them. They even sent slaves to fight for them. But when you look at what happened in the Civil War, it was no different than what happened to Afghanistan. The South was occupied, properties were burned and destroyed, and these places were colonized. And for years, which is why there was so much resentment that led to things like Jim Crow. And then to go into the civil rights movement, well, it's the same thing. Civil rights is appealing to the federal government to intervene in states' rights. Jim Crow was another states' rights issue. Does the state have the right to prevent black people from voting, to separate black people by law from whites? And the federal government was like, no, civil rights is a federal government issue. We can force Alabama and Georgia and every other state to do what we want them to do. And that authority comes from the Civil War. Because we won the Civil War, we meaning the North, we meaning progressives, which technically, I guess you can call them progressives, won the Civil War, so we have the right to do whatever we want. And World War II basically just gave people who are against them a new villain, which is Nazi Germany and fascists. So now everybody who is against progressivism is a Nazi or a fascist, even though the Nazis and the fascists were progressives. Nobody's ready for that conversation, though. But if you are, there is a book called Illiberal Reformers. You should read that, and they'll tell you how a lot of things like our modern abortion movement, a lot of our eugenics movements are things that we got from Germany, and things that we got from Germany before it was a Nazi country, and then how we inspired Nazi Germany. Remember, they were euthanizing people here. They were forcefully um, taking women's cervixes out and giving them mastectomies and all. Not mastectomies, that's the breast. Whatever it is, where they were tying up their tubes and everything. They were forcefully doing that. They were tying that stuff to welfare benefits. Remember, there was a woman who was forcefully had her tubes tied and without her permission, but it happened so that she can get welfare. And this was all the Germans did was take it to the next level. We just started killing them. We were just obsessed with not letting them reproduce. The Germans just skipped the extra step, just putting them in the gas chambers, machine gunning them. Why not? But that's really all it boils down to is those are the grand narratives that operate in our world today. Nazis, communists, federalism, eugenics, all this kind of stuff. I mean, it is what it is. You just have to be smarter than the average bear to get a lot of this stuff out of the way. He said Malcolm X predicts all these black celebrities and entertainers are puppets by white liberals. Yeah, but he was mostly talking about these people as not being qualified to run a society because they were entertainers. I would take it to the next level and say you don't need black leaders at all. If you're a man, you're supposed to be the leader. And if you're an individual, why do you want somebody else dictating or negotiating on your behalf? You know your needs. So somebody else trying to decide what you need is not going to work for you anyway. It can help you, but they can't get you where you want to go. They can only aid you so much as they feel like you should be aided. And that's just the nature of the beast. That's why charity works to a degree, but charity doesn't work completely because most of the time people only handle one of your needs. You go to a soup kitchen, you can get food. Doesn't help you with clothes all the time. It don't find you a house all the time. And it ain't going to change if you got a mental illness. Not going to help you there. And it's certainly not going to help you if you just don't have any interest in changing your way of life. But that's just one of those things that, again, you have to learn through trial and error. I've done a lot of volunteer work in a lot of different places. I've seen people live in pigsties, completely disgusting and terrible conditions, and they never even thought about cleaning that shit up. They don't care. You care more about it than they do, and they're not going to help you either. So, but that's usually a rarity. You do the stuff for the kids because the kids don't know any better. That's why you. That's why you go out there and you pick up the needles, and you want the abandoned houses bulldozed, and you don't want illegal dumping in the middle of neighborhoods because there's children in those neighborhoods. Yes, there's a lot of adults who don't give a shit. They just want to sit on the porch, smoke weed. They're not really paying that stuff no attention. But there's kids, and the kids don't deserve that. That's why you do that. Black slave masters, yeah. Have I heard that Dr. Umar hates interracial marriage? Obviously, I've heard that quite a bit. I've heard a lot about that, if we're being honest. Um, A white wrestler fails because he sucked. A black wrestler fails because of racism. Well, that's the truth of the world, isn't it? I don't think there. When was the last time a black man just said that he failed because he wasn't good enough? Maybe in the NBA or something. Anything other than that, it'll be because of racism or Diddy practices in the back rooms. You know, nobody ever just says like, "Man, I guess I wasn't good enough," and then just leaves it at that. That never is the case anymore. Timu says, since we're on the topic, as a white guy, it's getting tiresome how only white guys' failures are their own fault. Black people, women always fail because of sexism or racism. Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing about progressive policy is that they believe in tabula rasa, blank slates. Everybody has the same level of skill and ingenuity and intelligence and everything. And the only thing that changes is you could be just as good as a white man if only the white man got out of your way. It's like, no, that's not true at all. It's not about the inherent changes of black people and white people. It's the inherent differences in people, period. Period. I am not as good at chess as my father is, but he taught me how to play chess. So how could that be? I just don't care enough about the game. He studies the game, he reads books, he plays the game, plays against the computer on the highest levels. I play kind of on my phone in the bathroom. Like that's it. I don't dedicate so much time to chess. But when you have people who they they have decided that any failure is somebody else's fault, you have created an entire system of entitled people and narcissists. If black people win, it's black excellence. If a white man won, it's white privilege. That's the weirdest thing in the world. That sucks. That sucks. But it also, believe it or not, it demoralizes a lot of black people too. Because then they start getting the idea that they have to, yeah, I got to work twice as hard to get half as far. Who the fuck wants to do that? So you just basically decide, I'm only going to do the bare minimum. And then you do the bare minimum, you get bare minimum reward. You get your paycheck, but you don't get, extra days off, or you don't get that promotion because all you did was the bare minimum. And then it becomes a self perpetuating loop. You do the bare minimum, you get the bare minimum, so you do even less. Then you get even less. And then eventually they just get tired of you, to get rid of you and replace you with somebody else. And why wouldn't they? You don't give a fuck. You're not putting forth maximum effort. But yeah, I agree with you. I get tired of that stuff too. He only got the job because he's white. Well, how the hell do you know? I mean, it's just the weirdest thing in the world. And that's a perfectly logical argument to some people. He only got the job because he's white. Well, maybe he's the nephew of the guy who gave him the job. It's still a privilege, but it ain't white privilege. It's, I happen to know a person of authority privilege, which a lot of white people do. Some people white people do, some people white people don't. But it ain't white privilege, it ain't racial. It's family. If your dad went to a college and he starts giving money to the school and you go to the school, that ain't racist. School will let Denzel Washington's kid in there. Denzel Washington was an alumni and was giving money to the school. No problem. No questions asked. It's not racist at all. But all these things are, then you get the people playing with statistics and all that bullshit. I don't want to get into that. He said even communist Russia changed their cities from Petrograd to Leningrad. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that they do is they like to eliminate history. Renaming things. That's kind of where it starts, and it's all just to make people feel better. But totally to create a whole new reality. It's to separate people who still want to call it Petrograd from people who want to call it Leningrad. And that's what you don't see. Like here in Detroit, people still call Cobo Arena Cobo. Most people still call it Cobo. Almost nobody calls it by its actual name, which is like the TCF Center. You say, "Oh, I'm going down to the TCF Center." I'm like, what the fuck? I'm going to Cobo. Oh, okay, I know what you mean. I know exactly. I'll meet you there. You know, there was Shane Park. They renamed it to the Aretha Franklin Amphitheater. Ain't nothing wrong with Aretha Franklin, but everybody knows it as Shane Park. And now I'll meet you at the. We're now playing at the Aretha Franklin Amphitheater, and they're doing it because Detroit's a black city. Why should and the guy Shane, I believe he owned. There's an entire road named after the guy. I believe he was a slave owner. I think it's in one of my history books of Detroit or something like that. I think he owned slaves or something. That's why they renamed Cobo Arena, because the guy Albert Cobo, who was the mayor of Detroit, was a racist. So they decided we're going to change the name because we don't want black people stepping into the building named after a racist. And you're like, what the hell? Most black people don't even think about this guy. They don't know who he is. They have no idea who that guy is. I'm not going to hold you up. Most black people in Detroit don't know why these streets are named the way they're named and don't give a fuck. They know who Martin Luther King is. Other than that, you know, why is Macomb called Macomb? They don't know. They don't want to know. They don't care. That was another slave owning family, though. And it's a whole county named after them. Good luck changing that. uh, um, Western history in modern times begins and ends at World War II. That's the core of a lot of things. Yeah, that was year zero. You know, for a lot of progressives, is they look at everything through the lens of World War II, good guys and bad guys, capitalists and socialists, oppressed and oppressors. That's for a lot of what the Marxist worldview met the Western worldview of meritocracy. The Marxist worldview of oppressor and oppressed, death to meritocracy. The government can give away land, give away opportunities, free health care for everybody. Because remember, Japan had free health care. That's why he was sending guys to their death and kamikaze, because they had a cradle to grave program. They took care of you from the cradle to the grave. So if they told you to get into that airplane and dive into a ship, you better do it. Because the state is your god. And the emperor was taking care of you. He cared about you. He controlled your health care. They didn't know about that, though. Nobody know about that shit. That's why the Japanese were almost like religious. That's why they had to drop the bomb on them. And I don't even support the bomb. But that's why they had to do it. They had a almost religious devotion to the state. Because the state took care of them. It's really ugly. Japan used to be a really fucked up place. Now it's not. It wasn't all anime and cat girls. All right, that Bushido shit that they had going on over there was next level. So you see, they didn't drop the bomb on the Germans because they was trying to kill Hitler from the day he got into power. But the Japanese loved the emperor. Completely different countries. They'll tell you, oh, they didn't drop the bomb on Hitler because Hitler was white. No, the Germans were trying to kill Hitler long before he became as bad as he did. They was trying to kill that dude long before that. Remember, Hitler was a revolutionary. They've been trying to kill that asshole. The emperor is an emperor, though. And Mussolini, you see what happened to him. He wasn't that great. They didn't like him either. So he got his shit kicked in. And it was glorious too. It was pretty bad, actually. It was pretty bad. Yeah, Kamala was in Memphis. Yep. What are my thoughts on Donald Trump buying Canada and Mexico and making them 52 states? He on some bullshit. He's just talking, man. I can't believe people actually take something he's saying seriously. The Canadians are all tight-assed about it. They're just being stupid. And that's what I mean. Like, there was a time where he would have said something like that and people would have just laughed and moved on. But then the Canadians decided they're going to take him seriously. Like, he's going to go to war over this or something like that. Like, he's talking shit about, Greenland and Canada and Mexico, the Gulf of America, all this kind of crazy stuff that Trump is coming out. He's not serious about none of this shit, but he's got everybody reacting like he's dead serious about this stuff. Now, if he actually tries to do it, then that would be fun. He has to invade and kill a bunch of Canadians, and they're not going to like that. Uh, but if he wanted to take Canada, what can the Canadians do? They don't really have a military. They spend all that money on free healthcare, and now they're killing their own citizens. What are they going to do? And then Canada's mostly ice anyway. Ain't nobody want that shit. They do probably have natural resources though, which is I think is what Trump is looking for. That's why he was messing around with Greenland. He probably thinks that there's oil or something in the ice patches of Canada. But I don't think so. I don't think so. I think a lot of the Canadians though are very mad at their government, and they're mad because of what happened to the truckers, what happened during the pandemic, what's been going on in Canada with the assisted suicides, and a lot of the stuff with the farmers that's going on up there. There's a lot of terrible shit going on in Canada. A lot of terrible shit. But if you invade Canada just to overthrow the government, you'll have to invade France and Britain. You'll have to invade everybody. All of them are socialist shitholes, bro. And there's not much you can do about it. Like I said, there were Canadians on the border with Canadian flags during the pandemic trying to get the fuck out of Canada. And that wasn't that long ago. But they got to make better decisions, or they might mess around and somebody like Trump might actually get serious and talk about taking Canada. It's not going to happen though. Yeah, the renaming of teams, the Guardians and the Redskins. Um, Here's the weird thing: there's a petition to change it back, which is the strangest thing. White people changed it because it was offensive to the Indians. Now the Indians wanted them to change it back because they felt like it was an honor and they liked the logo. Very weird. You said they forced it. Well, Trudeau is the prime minister and he's a shithead. You know, if one of the worst world leaders in the in a country in a world full of shitty world leaders, Trudeau was one of the worst. Oh my goodness, he was an embarrassment too. I felt bad for Canadians, but now he's gone. I'm wondering his resignation. There's got to be something deeper to it. Maybe I need to read some Canadian newspapers to get a little bit more information. But I'm almost certain there's more to it than he's letting on. Because if I'm honest, all the progressives out in California should resign too. Gavin Newsom, you should just resign, man. Like Hollywood is on fire. You got all of these DEI firefighters that are unprepared for the job. You have no water. This is a level of incompetence not seen since Katrina. Like this is real levels of incompetence. They're gonna write books about this. Like it's that bad in California. Millionaires are losing their homes. People are fleeing. There's looting going on in California, which always happens during disasters. There's always looting in the United States. There's always looting. During floods or whatever, there's always looting. But the fact that they didn't have any water is a big problem. That's a big, 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 big problem. That's God tier incompetence. For you to have wildfires every single fucking year and you don't have any water. That level of incompetence means somebody should go to jail. I'm not even going to hold you up. It should be illegal to be that incompetent. Weakening your fire force is full of, I don't want to go into it, but making it so that they are completely and totally ineffectual. That level of incompetence should be considered dereliction of duty, and you should go to jail. But like I said, California is an interesting place. It's the only place in the world where you'll see needles on the ground, junkies falling asleep in the middle of the street, human waste on the street, cities going bankrupt, because I think a couple of cities went bankrupt in the last few years in California. You see tech companies threatening to leave, and now you see a wildfire completely destroying some of the richest parts of your entire state, and nobody's going to lose their job. Nobody's going to get voted out. Nobody's going to get fired. You had rampant looting for years and years because you allowed people to steal, and it's not going to blow back on anybody. I mean, it's the damnedest thing. That's real privilege. When you can be that level of a fucking incompetent and keep your job, that's real privilege. That's God tier privileges. That's God mode. Everybody can watch this shit burn, and then they'll get mad at somebody else for talking about how incompetent their government is. Hey, you don't talk about them like that. They're doing their best trying to fight this fire. And shut your ass up. Everything is on fire because they're incompetent. They don't know what they're doing. They have these fires every year. It's pathetic. But this is a raging inferno. This is the worst thing in the world. This is nuclear bad. And they're like, oh, this running around. Oh no, it's an arsonist doing this. Even if it was an arsonist, you don't have any fucking water. Whose fault is that? The arsonist would not be this effective if you had water in your reservoirs, if you had competent firefighters, even if it was an arsonist. You're completely and totally incompetent. These goofy celebrities voted and endorsed these politicians, and now they're watching their homes burn. That's some sick, twisted irony. They'll just buy new houses. They'll go to their winter abode. It's the regular people who are fucked when their job is burnt to the ground. The business where they worked for 10 years is burned to the ground. Those people are fucked. A lot of those other people, they're just going to go to a new house. It's sad. Really sad. I feel bad for those folks. Gotta stop hiring incompetent people, man. People are fucking incompetent. And here in Michigan too. About to be $10 eggs. They don't realize it ain't just the cost of eggs, man. The cost of anything that got eggs in it is about to go up. You ain't gonna be able to get a fried fucking rice in Michigan without that shit being almost $20 at this point. It's bad. It's just generationally bad. It's dumb stuff. And that's when you get the idea that A lot of these progressives are just changing the laws because they can. They claim that they care so much about people, but if you give them a choice, they'll choose animals, they'll choose the environment, they'll choose their personal picadillos, anything over actual fucking people. People need water, but no, they want to give more stuff to the homeless. Get out of here. They were rationing water. This is the stupidest fucking thing. Telling people how long they can take a shower because that made sense. When Michigan fucked up their water and Flint was down bad, nobody let them off the hook because it was a Republican that did it. So that level of incompetence was never forgotten. But Katrina, oh, they blame George Bush somehow, like he created the hurricane his goddamn self. And this fire, they're gonna blame it on climate change, an arsonist, anything other than your government being completely and totally unprepared. And I just found out today, a lot of those houses that burned down are uninsured because a lot of places like State Farm would not insure houses in California due to California's regulations on insurance. So yeah, I mean, the shit writes itself, man. There's always all these unintended consequences, um, unforeseen events. They're not paying attention. They're just trying to control everybody, man. It's all about control. They're not actually trying to help anybody. You just want to control people. You want to tell people how long they can take a shower rather than the water just be fucking there so they can use fucking water, man. Like, like that's easier. It's easier to control people than to let them be free. Did I watch the Megan Kelly episode with James Woods and that comedian Adam Cortland? I did not. I did not. Democrats like to blame everything wrong on Trump and with racism, even though they had a track record of racism themselves. Man, track record. They got gold medals in racism. They got full gold medals in racism, dog. All right, let's wrap this thing up. Thanks everybody for stopping by. I appreciate you. Peace out.